under the C101 training. It's called the New Dealer Authorization Training, and we'll cover, again, a single room programming environment. And again, we'll cover a little bit more in depth and detail on certain things here today, but that will also give you a good amount of information and allow you to grow over that. If you are not currently accessing, RTI Excel, please let your sales manager or sales engineer know. We'll make sure to get that set up for you right away, because that has a wide breadth of information for you. So I want to cover what each one of these sessions will cover, because again, trying to jam it all into an hour and a half is that's just insane talk. So we're not going to do that today. The other couple of things that I want to point out real quick is that, I want to make sure that you know where your resources are. Obviously, we'll go through the programming, and then please make sure to send any questions that you might have. Put them in the question and answer section of the software here. We want to make sure that you get those. I guess the chat's been disabled for some reason. I'll look into that, but we'll get those answered for you right away. So let's kick it off right away here and talk about it. The sessions that we're going to be talking about today, Tuesday, here in Minnesota at least, is structure for building these new projects within Integration Designer 11, and what it takes for you as a dealer, whether you're brand new to RTI or existing, what it takes for you on a mental side to make that adjustment and make that changeover. Because if you've been programming with us for a long time, this is a major change. If you've never programmed with us before, you need to know the structure in which to be successful, right? This is all about building foundations, folks. But this is all about, it goes with writing. It goes with, if you don't know what the letters are, how do you know how to write the words? How do you know then if you don't know what the words are, how do you write the sentences? And if you don't know how to write sentences, how are you going to write a book, right? So it's all based on the foundation of knowing what the letters are. And that's what we want to make sure that you know today, because a lot of even the most intricate and unique automation systems out there are still based on a foundation of knowledge. So we want to make sure that you have an idea on how to do that. That first part, the structure of building a new project, that really kicks it off and will help you in terms of the growth and the learning aspect of this programming software. Then I want to go through kind of give you an overview of what the platform looks like and where to find things and how things are structured in there and what you can expect from the different areas within the software. We'll begin a new project, and we'll start off with, again, that single room project. We'll add the different rooms, controllers, the sources, what all those mean. And then we'll talk about the configuration and the importance of going through the configuration steps of the system and the devices. And that'll be a lot of information for one session. So I'll cut it off there. Tomorrow, we'll get into doing more of the understanding of the activities and building of the macros and the command placement and how that plays into it. Because understanding how to add things is one, but now we're going to take that next step and making sure that we can actually use those devices and be able to access those things. And we'll talk about one of the most important features within Integration Designer 11, the system manager, and how that plays into your thinking of what needs to happen in the programming environment, how you need to set up the different devices, and even more so, you're forward thinking about what the client might need. And because we'll go over this about the middle part of the section, this will give you an idea of the different questions you need to ask during your walkthrough and your client interview that will help you develop an even easier understanding of how to develop the system manager. We'll talk about auto programming and how that plays into this, as well as give you an understanding of what tags are and how those play into it. And then the final day, our Thursday session, we'll really get into the user interface and the design and the functionality of this. And we'll talk about layers. We'll talk about adding additional controllers, how to swap devices, some additional kind of tips and tricks for you, how to grow a system very simply. And probably one of the most important things, how to make sure that you have the updated firmware and how to upload the project file. Because if you don't have those and you don't know how to upload what we've worked on, well, your client's not going to get anything, right? So that's kind of the structure of the 3 days. And again, if any time you do have questions or you're kind of getting lost, please feel free to put your questions in. What I will do after each session is I will put in the following day, I will create a little link for you to be able to download the program that I've created with you during the session, so that if you do happen to miss something or you want to compare what you've done versus what we did during the session, you'll be able to download that. and take a look at that. So that's kind of an idea of the session structure. Now, in terms of the resources available to you, first and foremost, if you don't have Integration Designer 11, you need to download it today. Here's a couple of quick tips for you. First, if you're using Integration Designer 9, you can keep that on your computer. It's not like you're completely replacing it. In fact, it's a completely different programming structure. Integration Designer 9 is great for those of you that have been using it for years and years, and you have projects still out there that are based in Integration Designer 9. You can still maintain those in Integration Designer 9 for the time being, right? But as I saw a few of you popping on and saying, this is my, I've been doing this for a while. This is my first foray into Integration Designer 11. This is a great opportunity for you. So make sure to download Integration Designer 11. No, you won't have to convert all of your old projects to it right away. You'll have plenty of time to work on that kind of stuff down the road. But for the time being, keep your ID9 on your file, on your computer. But know that any new projects that you're working on, any future projects, I would start to do those in Integration Designer 11 right away and take your time with it. I apologize. So that is on the dealer website. If you go under resources and then Integration Designer, you'll be able to download it right away. Even more so, if you're interested in getting additional information like additional training items, or finding the training calendar, or getting support, or looking for technical documents, those are under the support section of the dealer site. So when you log in, if you go over to the right-hand side and it says support, you'll be able to find the training information. You'll be able to find RTI Excel. You'll be able to find all the technical support documents that get into some really gritty, nitty, fun details. And as well as the RTI forum. So I would make sure to go on to there and take a look at that if you haven't been on the dealer site in a while. We've kind of restructured a few things. So if you do have questions, let us know. And then even further into the resources section, you'll find webinars, you'll find the recorded sessions, you'll find new RTI Excel modules, you find a whole bunch of options for you to help increase your learning and keep up to date with everything. Speaking of keeping up to date, if you don't currently register or haven't gotten the RTI newsletter for a while, please make sure to get that. Anytime we do any sort of new drivers or updates or firmware, we put in vital information into those areas. We also post them on our social media sites and our webpage. But if you do get the newsletter, please make sure to read it thoroughly. It will give you quite a bit of information. You may not know, if we've updated a certain driver in a while, but I'm going to show you some really cool things on Integration Designer that will help that back. So please make sure to read all the communication you do get from us. We don't just write it to, waste time. We do it because it's informational. So we want to make sure that you have all the information possible. All right. That being said, resources, all that fun stuff, vital. Now, we talked about as you start to get going with Integration Designer 11 and you start to program and understanding the structure of the programming environment, before we even open it up, it's important to know that, and I mentioned this before, that you need to adjust your mentality in programming. Whether you're brand new or existing with RTI for quite some time, there's a mindset that kind of needs to adjust as to how to get this to where it's a simplified process for you. So what I'm talking about is Integration Designer itself is a guided room-based approach, meaning that when you're doing your walkthrough on a project with the client or even by yourself, and you're going through and you're notating the different rooms, and you've done your interview with the client and you've gotten their requests and all this, Integration Designer 11 is based on that room approach. So, whereas each area will be a room or an area that you will place specific devices that belong in said area, or certain controllers, or the certain functionality that you want to happen in that room. So it's important to develop a kind of client profile for you, if you will, that kind of breaks it off, especially on the RTI side. And as you can see, I kind of just grabbed in a quick example here of Fred and Ginger Taylor, who live in St. John in the USVI, completely made up because that's where I just want to be right now, is I put together a real simplified one, just showcasing, kind of what the client requests were for this. So here's what they kind of were looking to do, 3 rooms with control over the devices within each room, distributed audio, Mr. Taylor's Android phone needs to be added in, basic lighting control, wants to get a feel for it. Little things like this are important because as you start to develop that program with RTI and with Integration Designer, this is a great starting off point in terms of things you can anticipate or need as you build that program. And I'll show you examples of how I'm doing that in a minute. The other thing you'll notice here in my project profile is I've broken it off into a couple of different areas. For example, the recommendations. So the RTI processors and expansion devices that we may need. So for example, the RTI XP3, current main moving to expansion and family room. The XP8V is brand new. It's the new main processor with the ZM24 transceiver. And then an RTI PCM4 expansion product going into the master bedroom. So devices, processors, and as a separate area. And again, this is, I apologize. And again, this isn't a rock solid way to do this. I'm just giving you a general idea of how I would structure this. And then your multi-room controllers as another example. So what type of controllers would be controlling the entire project or be global, for lack of a better term? You know, what are we looking at here? And do I need specific information? So for example, the RTI panel Android phone, I know that iOS devices are pretty straightforward, but the Android phone, I need the specifics for. So I grab those from the actual phone or find them online. And then you'll see that I broke it out. Global shared sources. What does that mean? Well, those are going to be the devices that are going to be used throughout the project, as an example. So a lighting system or a distributed audio system, or even the RTI music system, you know, for that distributed audio would be used throughout the project, right? Throughout, might be needed in every single one of those rooms. Now, is it 100% always that you have to do that? Absolutely not. If I wanted to say, you know what, I want to use the MS1 in just this room, and that's where I'm going to put it, you could do that. You can absolutely do that. But the point of this is to kind of break it up so that as you're developing it in the software, it's a pretty straightforward approach. And then you'll see that the family room sources, the control types, and the connections. And again, you may have your own method of doing this. I just want to give you an example of what is going on in this project for what's being controlled. And then the RTI family room controller is a T2X. Office room controller is a K8 on desk with the K8 stand. The little things like that you know, you're making notations on. Again, not the one and only way to do this, but in my mind, it replicates very similar to what you're going to be doing in Integration Designer, which will help you in terms of the programming aspect. All right, so we've developed a client profile, you know, and you'll also want to be able to take these projects and put them into a folder for your client. Now, again, I'm kind of a organizational guy, you know, freak when it comes to this kind of stuff. So I would develop almost a folder on my desktop or on my computer that would have all the information for that client. Maybe it's the initial interview with them, the secondary interview, the notes, the client profile. It might even include the wiring schematics, all the spec sheets for all the devices, whatever, you know, the architectural designs, whatever you're going to do, any special images that the client has requested or that you might think that they might like. I would put them and break them up into certain folders and put them into a singular folder for that project. Now, again, this is me, but by doing so, you would be able to then take, say, a flash drive, put that folder onto there and be able to give that to your installer with all the projects, including on that file, and I highly recommend this, is placing the Integration Designer project files and saving them onto, and in that folder itself, onto an actual hard drive or computer. We typically don't recommend, well, I shouldn't say this. I have heard horror stories from integrators that have said, oh, I saved it on my cloud drive and my cloud drive corrupted, or we ran into a corruption issue, or the cloud drive corrupted like 15% of the file, or, you know, there's been some, I've heard, you know, some rumblings and rumors about cloud-based storage not being the most reliable when it comes to this. I mean, I personally have lost a few different things, but it's not a big deal in my mind that you just store it on your computer and then maybe onto a solid state drive or a NAS or something that's accessible in that fashion. So cloud-based storage, not the most recommended, but it's up to you. You have full authority to be able to do so and pull those in. Just keep in mind that you won't be able to pull a program file out from, say, the processor of the devices in Integration Designer 11. So it is recommended to make backups of said files. And all the structure of programming and all these recommendations, they're true in both commercial and residential applications. In my mind, you still need that base structure. You still need to know what's going on. It might not be a family room. It might be a lobby, and or a restaurant, or maybe you've got seating area 1, seating area 2, and you're breaking those up. And even though you have them specified by rooms, you're still going to have a multi-room controller that controls each area, right? So you still need to break that up and understand where those devices are specifically going and what's being controlled. You don't want to just do it all into a single one area and just go with it. It actually will cause a lot more confusion for you, and we want to make sure that isn't the case. So that kind of gives you an idea on the structure of approach. For you ID9 guys out there, it's really been, this is where your adjustment to thinking will really play into your understanding, because Integration Designer 9, the previous versions were all very device based. You listed all, you put all the devices in, you place the whatever commands were happening, you pull a lot of things on the processor or the macros that were in the devices, and it was just very straightforward, just a device. And when I'm talking device, I'm talking like RTI based devices, remotes, handhelds, in walls, on walls, all that kind of stuff, tabletop. It was all just listed there. This breaks it up, makes the organizational structure a lot easier for you. Plus, we have the ability now to manage a lot of that with System Manager, which we'll talk about tomorrow. So once we have that structure of programming down, then we can start building the program file. Vincent, are there any questions that have come in so far? I saw that a bunch have been answered here, but anything that we need to backtrack or talk more about?
No, keep the questions coming. They're great questions, and it's a great way to learn is to ask questions. So keep them coming.
Okay, I just want to make sure there wasn't any that we needed to ask or talk to.
We're good. We're
good. So,
perfect.
All right, so let me switch my screen here real quick. Give me one moment. Let's open up Integration Designer 11. Vincent, can you just confirm that you can see it for me?
Yep.
Beautiful. Thank you, sir. So I'm going to turn off my camera real quick because I want to make sure that you have full view. I know most of you have me, full screen right now, and for that I do apologize. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm going to turn off my camera just so you can see the full software here, and as I highlight certain things. So, all right. So Integration Designer 11 is a Windows-based programming software, whereas a couple of quick notes about Integration Designer 11. It is highly recommended that if you're not running this on a Windows 10, a native 10 machine, that you do get one and run Integration Designer 11 on it. And the reason I state that is, there have been some serious advancements with the programming software and the devices themselves that a lot of previous versions of Windows just don't agree with sometimes. And so we want to make sure that you're successful each and every time. So it is highly recommended that you do get a Windows-based machine that does have Windows 10 as its native OS. If you do update or upgrade to it, it should work just fine. But again, I can't promise anything, but we do know from Windows 10 on, it works fantastic. And since it's a Windows-based structure and environment, we want to make sure that you're aware that each one of these areas and each one of these windows has a specific function for you. And as we look at the software itself, if you're not sure which version, every time you open up the software, the version, it should prompt for an automatic update if there is a current update. If you're not sure which version you currently have, you can always go to the help button and click about or check for updates. If you hit check for updates, it'll go through and say, oh, you're up to date, or hey, there's the latest version. Make sure to download. You can download it here and it'll update for you. That being said, if you do have an older program file that was programmed in a previous version of Integration Designer 10 or even Apex down the road, or earlier, it will be able to update those to the latest version. Now, here's where I want to make sure that's very clear. You cannot open an Integration Designer 9 file within Integration Designer 11. Only Integration Designer Apex-based files will be able to be opened within 11 and above. So please keep that in mind. Hence why we're not getting rid of ID9 right away. We want to make sure that you can still maintain those. So within Integration Designer 11 itself, because it's a Windows-based environment, you're going to have 3 million ways to do one thing. Case in point, if I wanted to create a new project, I could click on New System, toolbar button here. I could hit Control N as my quick key shortcut. I could go to File, New. So it's kind of up to you on how you want to do these things, whether you're a quick key shortcut kind of person, or you like the toolbars and you want to use the toolbar icon buttons. You certainly can, or if you want to just use drop downs, you certainly have those options. We give you quite a few different ways to do this because we know everybody types programs in different methodologies. So within the software itself, or when you first open up the software program itself, most things will look just plain Jane gray, right? Not a lot of options. Well, again, because we don't have a file open, it's not going to allow us to do anything. Each one of these specific areas has a specific function and need for it. So for example, on the workspace window here, this is where we will build out the project, the project tree, whereas all the different rooms, RTI controllers, devices, source devices such as IR, TVs, receivers, distributed audio systems, video distribution systems, all of that will be listed in this workspace location. Now, one point of note here, you'll notice that each one of these windows, whether it's this one here, this one, or back to the workspace, there's a little pin. This little pin is a nice little auto hide if you don't have a larger screen, where if you just don't need that open all the time, you can auto hide it and then take your cursor and go over to open it up. So each one of those windows does have that to give you a larger working space if you so need it. If you want to pin it in its location or essentially turn that off, you certainly can by just pinning down. You also have the ability to move these windows. So if I want to snap it to the top, I could snap that one to the top. If I wanted to snap it to the right, I could snap it to the right. If I wanted to take this and put it on a completely different screen, and I've got 3 different screens that I work on here at my desk, I could pull it all the way over and have all of these windows essentially on a completely different screen if I so desired, and not have to worry about space limitations in this generalized area. So it's kind of a really neat way to be able to place those in and put them where they're needed. If you need to get them back to normal, or you just want it back to how we had set it up, you can always go to the window and reset the workspace to the default, which will put it to the system default. Just keep in mind that if you do this with a project open, it is going to close Integration Designer 11. So you'll want to save your work prior to doing that. For example, if you've got a big project open and you happen to have taken your workspace window, right, and you can't figure out why I can't get it, I can't get this out of the way here. You could go Window, Reset Workspace to Default. It'll say, are you sure you want to do this? Because we're going to restart. You say yes, it'll open it back up to its default, and you're back in shape. So just keep that in mind, that we do want to make sure that you have plenty of room to work with. So we do have those auto hide features where you can move them, you can snap them to a certain location, or you can put them on a completely different screen altogether. Now, within here, the workspace, as I mentioned, is your tree structure, where all the your room-based tree structure where the project will be accessible. This big gray area, I like to kind of call this your canvas. It's also known as the workspace where the different configurations happen, the UI design happens. But this is essentially where a majority of your UI design will work. So that's why I kind of classified it as a canvas, but it's your big workspace area. Layers allows us to have multiple images layered on top of each other, layers or buttons or images put on top of each other on a singular page, and be able to have them appear and disappear on need if necessary, and provide certain amount of information from other sources within a page that aren't specifically on that page. And again, we'll get into more of that later. Tags. This window actually is a series of 5 different tab-based buttons. So you have tags, which we'll talk about later, but are essentially the labels for the buttons. You've got macro steps, which will be all the different types of commands that you're going to be wanting to put either onto buttons or within an activity, whether it's an IR-based command or a press and hold, or even internal logic or testing to see if something's on. All that can be found in the macro steps. Bitmaps and buttons are going to be the images and the buttons that are able to be used on the user interface, that are broken up by the different types of options that you may be using. You can, of course, use your own set of images as well. We'll show you how to do that. But as an example, here's just an example of 2 images from a folder that I have that can be used on a user interface. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that on Thursday. And then the objects, which is going to contain things such as direct URL links, if you're using RTI panel, pulling in specific IP camera and analog video streams onto a device, being able to create specific scrolling lists if need be, Zigbee-based tests, even VoIP, audio type of communication. So we've got a lot of different things that aren't necessarily source-based devices that are built into the project products themselves that we can access and utilize. So so there's your objects, or the 5 base tabs, and then the bottom at the bottom is your button properties, and this is going to consist of where you'll not only build your activities and create system manager functionality, but you'll also be able to put on feedback options and variables, whether it's a specific button state and image change to visibility to gauges and sliders, all that kind of fun stuff. All the commands and all the feedback necessary on those will be found in this generalized area here under button properties. You'll also notice that there are the different types of toolbars that can be used and changed. So as an example here, if I wanted to take, say, this toolbar and put it down here, I could certainly do that. I could leave it back up here. I can move these around. If I wanted to take this and put it up top, I could. I can create a secondary toolbar line for it if I wanted to. So you do have a lot of options in here. These are going to be your draw buttons, your selecting buttons, deleting, and they're all labeled with a simple pop-up image that showcases it. So within Integration Designer and all these different options, you also have all the drop-down menus. So creating a new file, doing things like adding devices or resizing, being able to do have undos or see a preview of something, being able to create pages. Again, all of these are listed here. You can use the base level of shortcut buttons. There's different options where we can set specific directories. For example, if you have your own IR directory, you have the ability to direct Integration Designer to go and pull that information from that specific IR library that you may use. And we'll show you that in a little bit. Be able to use communication tab, be able to get the device firmware updates through USB or update the firmware. All these different options are going to be in here, and we'll reference these as we go through the programming training. Our library managers, which allow us to create or adjust our IR and RS-232 one-way libraries. And then if we already talked about the windows and then the help. Now, Integration Designer 11 itself, as you can see, is a very straightforward approach. It's one of the main reasons that it's in the CDA Product Hall of Fame. And the software, not any product, but the software itself is in the Product Hall of Fame. And one of the reasons it's in there is because of the simplified approach to creating complex programming. It's a drag and drop type of environment, folks. We make it easy for you. So if we're going to go ahead and begin a new project with the single room programming, we'll go ahead and click on New System, and it's going to come up. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that it's going to save this type as a .apex system file. It's not going to save it as anything else. This means that only Integration Designer 10 and above will be able to open this. In fact, Integration Designer 11 at this point is the one that would open this one. So if we're going to do single room programming, we certainly could. You can name it whatever you want, but as I mentioned, you could create it and then save it to a specific file, say the Taylor residence. I could place that into their file under the Integration Designer files folder, so that if I decide to make revisions to it, it'll remember where I saved it last, and every time I hit save, it's gonna go right there. Now, a lot of people say, well, do you always make, do you have to make revisions or different versions of the program each time you do it? No, not necessarily. I usually do it when you've done quite a bit of work for a certain amount of time, like a half hour or so. You always want to save early, save often in order to save your sanity. But, making revisions allows you that if there's an error or something happens down the road and you're not quite sure what had happened, you can revert back to a previous version before that error might have happened, or maybe you can't figure out why the buttons not working the way it should, allows you to go back to a version and be able to check out what you may have changed or what may have adjusted. So anyway, getting back to what we were talking about here, for right now, yours will probably be saved under your Documents Integration Designer file, Integration Designer library. And when we hit save, it'll build the initial project. It'll open up our Add Workspace item window. You'll see at the top, it says Integration Designer, single room programming.apex with a little asterisk. This asterisk is your indication that something has changed and needs to be saved. So it's just kind of a reminder more than anything. Now, in this single room programming environment, let me give you some scope. It's a real simplified project for our client. They want, a simple controller that can control their receiver, their TV, why don't we use a Roku device today as well, a Blu-ray player, and why don't we use a music streamer as well? We'll use the RTI MS1. And excuse me. And within each of these, you'll build that out based on specific rooms. So we're doing one room, but we still need that processor. Well, the processor is going to live in the global area. So why do we do that? Well, because the processor is the brains of the operation. The processor is what makes everything happen, right? For example, if you're using an RTI panel for an Android or an iOS device, all those pages live on the processor, all the commands, all the macros, everything happens around that centralized hub. Now, the question I get is, well, does that always have to happen, or can I allow Integration Designer to, or a specific device like a remote, do a point and shoot for a specific command if necessary? Yes, you absolutely can do that as well. But the main hub of the operation is going to be a processor. And you'll notice that we have quite a bit of it available for you here. The KX3 and KX4 with processor, those are our in-wall, all-in-one touchscreen controllers that have built-in processors with them. Check out the sales training that we just did on the KX4 with processors. Pretty amazing what that thing can do. The RP4, XP3, XP6, 6S is the latest, 8V is the latest. Our Pro Control brother, the ProLink Z, a standalone device if you're not going to use a processor at all, which we never recommend, and the VXP82, which is a collaboration all-in-one system. So in this case, I'm going to use an XP3. The training kit for any brand new dealer is going to contain an XP3, a T2X, an unlimited RTI panel license, some fun swag, as well as some IR emitters. So we're going to build it based around that, just so that it's very similar to what is on RTI XL. So under this main processor, I have the ability then to name this if I'd like. I always encourage people to say name it so that it gives a little more definition to what it is or where it is. But in this case, since it's the main processor, that's what I'm going to use. So I'll click Add Processor. As soon as I do so, you'll see that under the workspace, under the global area, there's a processor section where there's our XP3 main processor. Now, you do have the ability to name that. The client's not going to necessarily see it, but you do have the ability to name that. If you want to name it, Nelson processor, or Nelson main processor, or family room processor, you certainly could. But what you'll notice after I've added that is that the workspace item area has now given us seven different tabs, right? No, 8 different tabs to work with. I apologize, I can't count. And within these tabs, this is where that structure comes into play that we were talking about with the software, with the client profile, and being able to kind of lay this out. So you'll notice that we did the main processor first, and now we're going to say, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to build the specific rooms, then we're going to add the specific devices in. Well, that goes along with what we've been talking about this whole time with Integration Designer, is that it's built on that type of premise. So the first tab is rooms, because we want to add the rooms in first, just like we're walking a project. So what does that look like? Well, what room are we going to be working with? Well, why don't we just do a media room as an example? So there's a media room. Oh, one other point of note. Under the library section here, you'll notice that there's a drop-down. We have these rooms in all sorts of languages available for you. So if you're Swedish with us today, you can go ahead and use the media room in Swedish. Or if you're using Dutch, there you go, if there was one. So you do have the options to be able to change the library language of those rooms. And then it is a dynamic based search. So as you type in the certain letters, it whittles down the search criteria. So in our media room, we're going to go ahead and add that into our project. And you'll see it's posted in the workspace now with media room, controllers, and sources. So let's add a controller in now. So we've got our single room. We're in good shape. Let's clear this search out. And under the controllers, you'll see that all of the RTI devices are going to be listed here under controllers. This includes all the app options, all the current handheld options, all the in-wall type of controllers, in-wall and on-wall type of controllers, as well as all of our legacy-based projects. So if you're going into a project, say a client calls you and say, I bought this house, they've got an RTI system in it already, it's got a T3V plus. Can you program that, with my stuff? Yeah, you absolutely still can do that. I'd probably recommend getting a newer version. But again, we want to make sure that we keep our clients happy. So in this case, when we're deciding on the devices to put into our project, and let's say this client wants to use a handheld controller as well as, say, an iOS-based device like an iPad, where do I put those? Well, we need to decide that under the select room to add the device in. So there's global and then there's media room. Where do I want to add the device, the RTI controller in? Well, for under media room, let me backtrack. A good rule of thumb is that if there's a chance that this device might control other areas within the project now or in the future, put it in global. For example, an iOS-based device that is going to be mobile and moving around, you'll want to put that in, say, a global area. So I select global and then maybe do an iPad as an example and hit next. But I won't do that yet. But a media room, a controller that's designated for a specific room, like a T2X that is going to live in that area and control, for the most part, just that area, I would then select it for where it's actually going to sit and live, right? Most of the time. Now, a question comes up every once in a while, well, what if I have an in-wall panel, like a KA11 as an example, that's on the wall in the entrance? Do I create a lobby or an entrance area? And then can I have it control all the other areas in the house? Well, in this case, yes and yes. You could put that into a specific room, but because the main functionality of it is to be more of a whole house controller rather than just, say, the lights in that walkway, I would put that into a global. It doesn't mean that you can't control those lights in that walkway, but because you want more functionality and we want integration designer and the system manager to be able to control all aspects of the project from that one controller, I would put it into global. But in this case, I'm going to use a T2X. I'm going to put it in the media room and click next. As soon as I do so, it comes up and it says device information. It's kind of your check. It says media room, RTI handheld controller T2X. Great, that's exactly what I'm looking for here. Then it has page template. Okay, do I have Coral or Obsidian? Well, these are the base page templates that we will use for your user interface, the starting off, if you will. Coral is the brand new one that has the most functionality and it's incredibly easy to use. It's very smooth and very simplified. So I'm going to use Coral. It has the most functionality to it built in. So I'm going to use Coral. Then it says list menus or button menus. This is how the client is going to access the different things they want to do in said room. They want to check the lights. If they want to watch a movie, it's going to be in a list format or a button-based format. A list format being almost like a two-way scrolling, a scrolling list that they can select from, kind of like when you're looking for a song, say on one of the streaming sources and you're scrolling up, same type of scenario there. Button menus are going to be a lot more custom friendly in terms of what do you want them to do. So if you've got a client that is going to, say, have something a little bit more on the customized side, like a restaurant or a bar, you're going to probably want to use more button menus than you would list menus. List menus we create, button menus you create. In this case, we'll just use list menus to show you how easy this is. Then it says, do you want to add pages for the following sources to this device? There's the weather. Do I want a weather page here? Sure, why not? Do I want a home page for the media room? Sure, why not? These are all things that make it easy for me to do. If you don't want a page, say you didn't want a weather page, you could uncheck it from this device. Doesn't mean it does it from the rest of them. It's just this one. So in this case, I'm going to keep that checked, and then I'm going to name the device. A good rule of thumb name the device for where it is. You can use abbreviations if you so like, but in this case, we're doing media room. So I might just do media room, T2X media room, so that I have an idea of what's being used. I hit add device, and there it populates under the media room with controllers, T2X media room. Now we mentioned adding a device into a global based area, like an iPad. So if I wanted to add that iPad, and I'm kind of the rule of thumb, you always want to add all the rooms, all the devices, you add a room, you add a device, all the devices into there, and then you add the source. You kind of build that project out room by room. And in this case, because we haven't built out the main area yet, I'm going to go ahead and add this iPad into the global area. So we click on global, RTI panel iPad, I hit next. There's my check. Do I want these pages in here? Sure. Do I want the page template Coral or Obsidian? In this case, Coral works perfect. So I want that similar in terms of look and feel. And then you'll see under the options, there are some different list menu options that have some additional information. Now playing, lights and climate, intercom and security. These are additional windows that will be on that homepage user interface that will give you additional information because there's more real estate to work with. You'll remember when we added the T2X, it just said list menu, button menu. But because we have so much more real estate in terms of a user interface and on that screen itself, I can put additional windows in here that can be fulfilled with specific information. Case in point, if I wanted to be able to have lights and climate control right away from that main homepage, I could put those in and adjust the necessary parameters to put the data in. Same thing with now playing. If I want to see what's currently playing in that area. In this case, we'll just use it as list menus now playing. RTI, in this case, I'll just do family iPad and hit add device. All right, so now I've got my controllers for my family iPad set up in here. With the media room, I've got my controllers with the T2X media room, and then it says sources home. So let's move on now to those sources. What does sources mean? Sources are everything from IP drivers, RS-232 drivers, IR commands or IR-based controlled devices, RS-232 devices, even basic page sets that like power off page are considered sources. And the reason those are all bundled under one specific, I guess, folder called sources is because they can be accessed and used within the programming structure and the macros to initiate different things with System Manager. And you can do checks on them. If XTV is on, then don't run this. And because they're classified under one specific area, it makes the functionality very easy in terms of navigation of those commands. So we put all those things for drivers, infrared, RS-232, and even page sets. Those are going to all be listed under a sources area as we add them in. Now, what you'll notice under the drivers tab, first and foremost, is there's a full driver library here. You may say, well, wait a minute. Why are all those posted in here? Well, that's one really cool feature about Integration Designer 11 is that our entire updated driver library that of all the drivers we've written is loaded into here for you. So as well as any updates that happen to it. So as they go through and add the different updates to these drivers, they'll be posted in here and used each and every time, or updated for you each and every time. Additionally, you have access to any drivers that you may access or may download or have from other third parties, such as, say, I don't know, 2N or a Doorbird-based driver or something that somebody may have written out, like irrigation caddy. I don't know. All these different types of drivers that are available to you outside of the RTI realm. Keep in mind that RTI, we have a dedicated team to write these control drivers, but there are more products that come out faster and faster each year, and we don't have the time to be able to put them all in each and every time. It takes a while to be able to do that. But there are people out there that do write their own drivers, like manufacturers, and you have access to be able to download those. Or even further, if you are really need something, there's people on the RTI forum that will write them for you or have written them, and you can buy it from them and still have full access to it. Just keep in mind any drivers that you get outside of the file that of Integration Designer are not supported by RTI tech support. So you'll have to contact whomever wrote that driver for any technical support. Case in point, if you wanted to get a big ass fans driver, well, that's a driver written by a third party. You couldn't come to RTI tech support and say, hey, I can't get this thing to work. I won't turn on that fan. We would say, well, we didn't write it. We don't know how, what it was written in or what the code looks like. So you'll have to go to the person you got it from. Okay. So drivers as an example. So let's start off with drivers. Let's add in a couple of quick drivers just to show you how this works. So the first one that I want to do is I'm going to add in a specific receiver. So why don't we do a Yamaha, and I'm going to use the Yamaha Avitage. And under the global area is where I'm going to actually put this specific zone. But hold on now. Do I put it under the specific zone? Well, actually, in this case, I might actually put the specific zone into the specific room. That doesn't mean I can't access it from the rest of it. It doesn't mean I won't have access to that specific zone as a global from a global controller, but because I can be more specific about the room and area that for which I put this driver, this part of the driver into, I can actually have it do some pretty unique things to it. So in this case, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here in a second, I'm going to put zone 1 under the media room because that's actually where this device will live. In fact, as you can see, if this receiver were living in, say, a rack, maybe in the global area, and might have additional, functionality to it, like say we were going to use the Spotify built into it as a distributed audio, then yeah, I would probably put that in global. But in this case, because I'm just using the Avitage, the zone 1 in that media room, that's where I'm going to put it. Now, the other point I want to make very, very clear is that whenever you're using a driver like this, you'll want to take a look at the right-hand side where it gives you all the information about what it is, what the version is, all that kind of fun stuff. But the most important thing that you can look at here is this more information. The more information is basically a write-up of how this driver works, how it's configured, what devices it's been tested with, the command structure, the release history of it, all the information you need to be successful in terms of getting it set up, configured correctly, and put in and working on within RTI. Please, please, please don't try to control something you don't already know how to control. In other words, if you've never used a Yamaha Avitage receiver in your life and you have no idea of how to use the commands or what the DSP settings are or how to get those set up correctly or anything of that nature, please make sure to understand how that works before you go in and try to control it with RTI. Because you'll call tech support and they'll say, well, I don't know, here's what the commands are. And, you should be able to do this, but you're going to need to have the knowledge of the device you're trying to control before you try to control it, please. So with that being said, zone 1 goes into the media room. Do I need a page for this one? In this case, I don't need a page because I'm going to be using RTI to issue commands for that device. Now, if I was using, say, something like the Spotify, then yeah, I might use a page for it. But in this case, I don't need a page because I don't need the basic command. This is just a simplified single room programming environment. The other part I want to point out is this check mark next to the words set as room audio source. By check marking this, we are basically saying that this Yamaha Avitage is going to be the primary audio output or source for all of our devices, whether it's a Blu-ray player or a Roku device or a streaming device. It's all going through the receiver and the receiver's pumping out the audio. If that is the case for this one, then leave that checked. If it's not, then you can uncheck it. But in this case, I want to, because what it will actually do is make sure that the programming is correct for all the volume and the structure of the commands is set correctly. And then the naming of the device, I wouldn't keep it as zone 1. I might name it Yamaha AVR, and this is media. It's a little long-winded, but that's all right. And I'll add the device in. As soon as I do so, you'll see that under, if I were to clear this real quick, under my drivers, I now have add to existing driver, and there's my Yamaha Avitage. If I typed in Yamaha, it's still there too. But what I want to point out is that if you're going to be, say, using zone 2 for another area, you can put and use that same driver. So you wouldn't have to load another driver in. You could use that same driver to load zone 2 into another room or zone 3 into another room. So we give you the ability to use a singular driver and not have a whole bunch listed here on the left-hand side. All right, so we've got our driver set up. Let's add in a Roku device just for the sake of argument here. So there's my Roku, my media player. You can see this driver can actually control 16 different players. Fantastic. If I wanted to see a sample file of how it worked, I could click on this. It would open up a sample file of how the commands are set up, but we'll show you how easy this is here. So I'm going to add in player one. Player one actually lives in the media room. So I'm going to hit next. Do I want a page for the Roku? Yes, I do. I want to be able to command. I have all the transport commands for it. So I do want pages for the Roku. Do I want it set as the room audio source? No, because it's actually going to be going into the Yamaha. So I'm going to leave it as such and then type in, say, Roku media room, not family room, and hit add device. Boom. You'll notice that the driver is posted under the processor because, again, the driver is listed is living on the processor, but the source is in the media room. All right. And then why don't we do one more? We'll do the RTI music, which is our incredible and seamless RTI streaming devices, the MS3 and the MS1. RTI music is the driver for it. You'll see that if I click on this here, it'll say, okay, here's the driver name. Here's the information about it. Here are all the different players that can be configured with it and set up. But now we got to think to ourselves, well, is there a chance down the road that this player, if I'm using, say, an MS1, is going to be used as a distributed audio source? If the answer is anything short of yes or maybe, then put that player into the global area. Otherwise, you could put it into that specific room. So in this case, I'm going to change it to global. I'm going to put player one in there because I think there's a chance. I've sold them pretty hard on that distributed audio system down the road. And so I'm going to put player one in here to ease the ability for me to create the distributed source down the road.
So
So
Tyler,
I'm going to put it player one, global,
so Tyler,
still fully accessible by the media room. Do I want a page for it? Absolutely, I want a page for it. Is it going to be my room audio? No, it's not. The Yamaha is. In the case of the media room or a distributed audio system in another area, but in this case, no, it's not. And I'm going to just name it the RTI streaming music and hit add device. All right. So we've got our drivers in there. These are all going to be IP controlled. We're in good shape. Let's move on to, say, the infrared tab. Now, what do we need in infrared? Well, why don't we just say we're using a TV in this case? So I'm going to just type in a quick Samsung TV. And this code set is actually a pretty robust code set. We keep up with it all the time. In fact, we've got somebody in France, our Cyril, who loves making sure this is up to date. So I'm going to go ahead and use the Samsung code set that we've built in. But again, you do have full accessibility to using your own personal sets if so desired. In this case, Samsung TV, most models, you'll see that here's a listing of all the different codes that are on here and available for you. Where's the TV live? It lives in the media room. So that's where I'm going to put it. Media room, Samsung TV, next. Then it's going to say, do you want a page for this? In this case, no, I don't need a page for it because I'm going to use a Blu-ray player and I'm going to use a Roku as my primary watching methods. If it's a smart TV, then maybe, yeah, we might create a page for it. But in this case, I don't need any control pages for it. Doesn't mean I don't get the commands. I just don't need an actual user interface page. What output am I going to do? Well, if I'm going to do all the ports, I just leave it as such. If I'm going to send out every IR code all the time out of all 3 ports, so I don't have to worry about it, go for it. But if you want to specifically port route it to eliminate any issues down the road, or if you're, you can certainly select the port route and it will automatically name it for what you put here. So if I put Samsung TV media room, it's going to name that port on the processor for me, Samsung TV media room. Do I want to set this as my room audio source? No, I don't, because again, everything's running through the Yamaha. I click add device. And now it's a Samsung source for the media room. And let's do one more. We'll do a Sony Blu-ray player. Most models. Again, it's going into the media room. And there's all the IR commands built in it. Great. Next, do I need a page for it? Yes, I do. Check out the drop-down. Now it says Samsung TV media room, so I don't need to go back and name that. Port 2 is going to be coming out of the XP3. As you can see, there's only 3 IR ports out of the XP3, so I'm going to select port 2. And then I'm going to select Samsung BD Player Media. A little long-winded, but we get it. I hit add device, and it's in there. All right, we're almost done here. We need to add in one last set. Now, here's our one-way RS-232 sets, code sets that we can add in, same type of process as IR. But we also need to add in any page sets. Page sets are going to be those pages that maybe we need to have it be an activity down the road, or we need something that happens during the process of the macro so that the client knows not to do anything, or that it's visually reassuring. The best one that I can think of in terms of examples for this is using a please wait page, because the please wait page can be triggered right as somebody selects that specific activity, like watching a movie, comes up on their device and says, please wait. That way they know, oh, the process is happening. I don't need to do anything. I don't need to keep pressing those buttons. It basically eliminates the button mashings. And in this case, because we'll have access from all of our devices as this project continues to grow, I'm going to actually just place it in global, because I can access that please wait page from one area instead of having to do it for every single device. So in this case, global, please wait. I'm going to add it. Do I want the page? Yes, I do. Name it please wait, and I'll hit add device. And let's close the workspace window here real quick. The other tabs we'll get in, you can take other trainings on what those look like. But what you'll see here now is that our workspace has grown. Here's our global area with our big brain, the XP3. The controller that's in the global area is the family room iPad. All the drivers that live on the processor are listed right here. All the sources that are living in the global area that are accessible by any room are here. Please wait, the RTI streaming music, weather, and home. And then the media room itself has its own set. The controller, the T2X, and then the sources. And again, the Yamaha AVR receiver, which we decided was going to be, excuse me, the zone 1 was going to be living in the media room, but the driver is still living here, which is fine, because that's the drivers live. And then the Roku, same basic concept there. The Samsung TV only lives here. We've put, oops, sorry about that. We've placed it in here. That's the only place it is. It won't be listed up here, as well as the Blu-ray player. The please wait page is right there. As we mentioned, we want to put in global so we can have access to all our controllers. So with all these different devices that we've added in and gone through, then we need to go through the configuration of these and making sure. Now, this is very important. You want to take your time with this and go through it very thoroughly. Again, it relies on you having knowledge of the system setup, having knowledge of what the client's looking for, making sure that you have an idea of what's connected to what and how it's connected. So let's start off with the overall system property. So if I go up to File and System Properties, and again, you'll do this once all of your rooms have been built here. Under the System Properties, you'll see that there are 7 different tabs up here for us. The first one being Zone. My recommendation is that, as you start to grow systems or just get in the habit of putting together more and more systems together, you can change this RF system zone code. And I would change this to anything but 0. It can be some arbitrary number if you want. But I've always been in the habit of just changing it to some arbitrary number, because that way there's no possible interference between the RF signals. If you're doing, say, an MDU application where you've got, apartment, 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 well, you want to make sure that the zone code is different for every single one of them. Network key, no need to worry about this unless directed so by tech support if you're having any issues in terms of Wi-Fi or web Wi-Fi keys. But tech support that's the only time you should ever really use this. Configuring Zigbee networks, we'll touch a little bit about that here in a little bit, but this is where you would configure and grow Zigbee networks or add additional Zigbee networks. RTI panel and virtual panel. This is where we set up our remote access. So if my client says, I want to use RTI panel, or I want to use my phone to control my house from anywhere in the world, we need to set up a static IP or a dynamic DNS for that system or that location, and put that into the network settings under the port route of 4110, and put the same information here for that external IP or host name here. Okay, so this is where you set up the remote access. In terms of licenses, this is where we're going to add in the licenses for the RTI panel and virtual panel. And again, excuse me, We always recommend just buying the unlimited license because everybody has, for the most part, more than 3 devices in the project. But you can always do singular. You can buy them directly from your RTI distributor. You buy them directly from us. You can buy them online if you need to from us. But when you do, you'll need to add in that license here. So if I were to click add, once you get the license and there's a full instructions on how to do so, then you can just add the license in. It'll be listed there and you'll be in good shape. The thing you need to remember to do is the licenses are tied to the processor's MAC address. So you'll want to confirm that the MAC address for the processor ID is the same as the actual one you're installing here. And again, we have a full training on how to get that all set up. Dealer information is pretty self-explanatory, so is client information. This is where you put all sorts of fun notes in here that, so-and-so did what and how did they do that, or who's the interior designer and all that kind of fun stuff. Location, this is where you want to put in the specific location for the client. So if you have somebody in a specific country, like Manila, you can put that in. If it's a specific city in the States, as an example, like Minneapolis or St. Paul or whatever, you can select it there. Even more so, we don't have every single city listed. So you can grab your phone, find out what the latitude and longitude is and put it in here. It's important to do this because the daily events that can happen, or even the astronomical time clock that's built into the processors to help with automation-based sequences based on time of day or even sunrise and sunset are dependent on this location information. And if this is not correct, then it's not going to work right. So take your time and make sure to select it here, or if it's not listed under country and then the city, put in the latitude and longitude. Clock, same thing. You want to make sure you have the proper time zone for wherever you may be in the world. Where's central? There it is. And then networking. Now, if you're going to be, I always recommend putting in the networking information here. And again, when you click add, you'll want to put in the network SSID. We don't have any sorts of tests to make sure that the connection is correct here or even on this tab. So you need to put in this information exactly the way it should be set up. So we put in the SSID, you select the type of authentication, whether it's WPA2 or WPA or whatever it might be, and then you put in whatever the code. So if this is the unlocked Wi-Fi, and we'll just do key 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. Oh. All right. And there it is. But again, there's no test. So whatever information you put in there, you need to make sure it's accurate. Once you put that information in, we can utilize that throughout the rest of the devices. So once you've taken your time and gone through the system properties, you press OK, then you can move on to the other devices. The first one being the processor. What type of configuration do we need to do for that? Well, when I click on the XP3 main processor, you'll see it says processor configuration and RTIQ. Under the processor configuration, you'll find properties and a number and 8 different tabs here. Now, I'm not going to go through and do each one of them, but just highlight a couple of them. Under the general tab, I get in the habit of clicking preserve flag and relay output states. That's a little bit more advanced information, but I would get in the habit of that if you are using those. Network. This is where you're going to decide, is this going to be connected to, how is it going to be found on the network itself? Is it through DHCP or are you using a specific static IP? So whichever way you deem necessary, make sure to select it here. Clock, you'll use the system default. So we don't need to use that. We don't need to set it here. You certainly can uncheck that, but we've already done it in system properties. Same for location. Port names, this is where we can name each of the ports, including the relays, sensing ports, RS-232 ports that are available, and sense ports are all available to be named on here to help with your programming. Relay modes, you can select as normally open and normally closed on this particular processor, as well as internal logic flags and any notes that you may have. Now, each one of these, as I mentioned before, it is worth taking your time and going through, and we do have quite a bit more in-depth information about what each one of those means, but do take your time with that. The other important note under the processor is the RTIQ. You do want to make sure that you do enable RTIQ monitoring. RTIQ is your remote monitoring service that is offered to you from us free of charge. Once you've gotten your account set up for RTIQ, and all you need to do is talk to your sales engineer or call RTI customer service, and they'll get you set up and to do that on your account. Once you enable this, you'll put in your credentials and you'll be able to get a dashboard for all the projects that you work with so that you can do all sorts of remote monitoring. Again, we have a full training on what RTIQ is and how it works, but this is where you get it enabled. I recommend you do every project enabled with RTIQ monitoring. And then just as a quick little tip, system name, don't leave it as the main processor here. Name it for the client, whatever the clients may be, Nelson, Home, or whatever the case may be. Because on your dashboard, you'll have 3 or 4 XP3 main processors and XP6s, but by here on your dashboard, it would be Nelson Residence or Nelson Home or Taylor Place of Plato or something like that. All right, next, the iPad. We go through the properties on the iPad itself. And properties on this one are fairly straightforward. Do you want to keep it in auto rotation? In other words, landscape and portrait mode. The pages that we offer you are configured that way automatically. But please keep in mind that if you change something in a portrait mode, you will have to make the adjustments in landscape mode when either building your own page or making adjustments to another page. So if you keep it in the auto rotation, just double check how to on your user interface to make sure that it looks good in both fashions. Sounds, you do have the ability to have 50 different wave file sounds that can be assigned to specific buttons if necessary. Output, nothing on there. It's all done through the system properties. Security, you can always do a default password for the whenever somebody tries to get into the RTI panel itself from the open app or from opening up the app for the first time. However, keep in mind, it's not going to come up every time they go to the app. It's only when it's fully closed and they reopen it that it would prompt the password. And then any notes. We press OK. And then we get to the drivers. The drivers, you'll want to take your time with as well. And each one of these drivers has specific types of properties that need to be addressed. For example, if I go to the driver properties for weather, you'll see that I need to enter in the information. Now, this is why I mentioned before that you need to understand how the device works before you actually try to use it. So, and not just for the weather driver, for all of them. So for example, on the location for the properties here, if I click on this general area, you'll see that at the bottom here, it says location. Enter the initial location, zip code, city, country, latitude, longitude. Well, city, country, does that mean I need to put in like Paris and then spell out France? Or does that mean I need to do, an abbreviation? Well, under the driver info, I see that here's location setting and what it entails. So here's examples: a zip code, a international postcode included, gives you an idea, including the country code, location, city and state, or city and country, or even latitude and longitude. So we give you the information here, but it's important to note to read that information so you know exactly what to put in here. So in my case, I could just say 55410 as an example. I could change the unit type. Each of these should have some sort of drop down if there is an option for it that you can choose from. If we go to the Yamaha Avatage now and go to the properties of that one, you'll see that it's a little bit different. The connection type can either be serial or network, TCP. So if I chose serial as an example, it says, okay, which serial port do you want to use? Well, I could use RS-232 port 1. That's the RS-232 port on the processor. If I was going to use network, which is great, then how is it going to be found on that? How is the processor going to find the device on the network? Well, it's either going to be UPnP or a static entry. If I decide static entry is the way to go, hey, we put it in 10.1.1.240, whatever that address might be. And then the port, which again, the little bubble will tell you most of the information here. Roku is even more different because it asks, okay, how are we going to find this? Is it going to be serial or IP? Well, if you're going to use serial, you need to know what this serial number is and where it can be found. Or if it's going to be IP, what is the address for it? Now, again, if I'm doing a static IP, 10.1.1.2235, done. And I set that up on there. Do I want to name this Roku player? Oh, I could. It might be worthwhile to name it, for anything but 0, or you can name it for Roku Media Room. Roku Media Room. Something along those lines. Do you need fixed channels? are there any specific channels that the client absolutely wants? And I'm going to show you something really cool about the Roku driver that does this automatically for us. And we can show how that works. But in this case, if I wanted to put a specific fixed channel, like, I don't know, the Fitbit channel, whatever that might look like, I certainly could put it in here. Again, these are fixed channels that you're going to need information from the actual Roku device to make sure that it's correct. RTI Music is even more different. See why it's important to go through and take your time with this? Because on here, it says no servers found. How come there are no servers found? Well, that's because it needs to search and find them. And if I click on this and I don't have the MS1 or MS3 configured and set up yet, it's going to say there's no devices found, as you can see here. But if I were to open up RTI Music under the on my Windows program here and get it set up, then it would find that device and be able to pull that information in automatically. So the reason I'm showing you all of these is because there's different ways to be able to get devices set up. Some are automatic, like this one. Some have to be manually entered, like this one. Some can be just selected, like, say, using not even entered, just using a specific serial port and just choosing the serial port. So each device is going to be different based on how it actually can actually work. And how it communicates and how it checks. So it's important to read the get info and the driver information and get that in, and figure out what is the best way for you and the client to be able to communicate, or what is the best way for the RTI system to communicate with that device. Okay. Now, in terms of the IR devices, we don't have nearly that amount of configuration here. So if I go down to the two IR devices, the Samsung TV, and go to IR properties, you'll see that, oh, there's my output port. Is that correct? Yeah, that's correct. If I need to change it, I certainly could. The cool part about being able to do this is that if I change it here after the fact, it will change it for all the programming that I've done. So if for some reason I plugged it into port 3 for whatever reason, and I had done all the programming and all the macros and all of the commands and all that stuff, I could just change it right there to port 3 and I'm done. I don't need to go through and change all those commands again. It would be done for me. I can also change the default from 0.3 seconds after the command. Each IR command comes with a 0.3 second time delay after the code has been initiated. So in this case, it's going to initiate the code. It's going to send the code, wait 0.3 seconds before going to the next step in either the macro sequence, in that macro sequence, excuse me. So if you don't want that on, you can turn it off. It's always good to leave it on, in my opinion, just because it, 0.3 seconds really isn't that much. And it ensures that the device realizes the code is complete before another one is received. Can you add additional time to this? Not here. But in the macro sequence, yes, we can add additional time to it. And then the same is true for this. The Blu-ray player, obviously, is the same type of sequence. Okay. So really what we've done so far in terms of all of this is, I know I kind of skimmed through a few things real quick because, again, in a single room environment, it's not incredibly important to take the time to go through and, say, name all the flags unless it's needed. But what Integration Designer 11 does is it's going to do a lot of this work for us as we go through. What I really want to make sure that everybody's aware of is that when you're adding the devices like drivers, it is very, very important to know how to control a device before you actually try to control it. Read the get information on it. If you're not sure how something works, and you're not sure why it's not connected, read the get information before you call tech support. I'm sure it will most likely answer that question for you. It's better than sitting on hold, right? Or if we're really busy that day. If you're just not sure how a command works, you can, if there's a sample file, you can always open up a sample file. Let me open this one up here real quick for you just to show you what that looks like. My taskbar here. Oh, that's weird. Huh. Open. Okay, well, anyway, I must have too many windows open. I apologize. But you can open up a sample file to see how those commands have been placed and where they go so that you have an idea of how it works. So really, take your time with this section on it. the idea behind this, ladies and gentlemen, is that I want to establish the fact that you want to build this out room by room and device by device. First and foremost, we haven't even touched the user interface. In previous versions of Integration Designer, you would have already been in the user interface quite a bit. We don't need to be there yet. Integration Designer 11 takes a majority of the work out of the mix for you, and it makes it very easy to do. Okay. So what I want to do here is I want to make sure that we do have a little bit of time for any questions before we move on. I know we covered quite a bit in a short amount of time, but if you do have some questions, feel free to post them in, or if there's something else that we need to show. Vincent, do we have anything come up that we need to replicate or show?
The only thing I would ask us to do
We do have a
is
question.
to create
Perfect.
an iPad with a button menu.
Sorry, my speakers went mute.
Can
You
you
there,
hear me?
Vincent? Yeah, now I
Yeah,
can hear you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, the only thing I would ask is that we create an iPad with a button menu. A gentleman had
Sure.
asked for that, just so that we could show the difference. No, we don't have to go into it too deep, but there is a difference. It's a lot quicker of a path to use list menus, because they're automatically generated. Whereas with button menus, you do have to drag and drop your own icons. You do have to program and stuff like that. So we like to show the faster route because it makes us look better, but that's what we'll do. Someone's asking, how do I add RS-232 manually? We'll show you how to do that in another lesson. It's very easy. You use the IR, or actually I should say the RS-232 library manager that is included with the software. And you
Yep.
would add it like a source.
So I just pulled it up real quick. Here's the RS-232 library manager. You essentially you create a new file in your folder of wherever it might be listed here. Let me find documents, Integration Designer, command libraries, and then you'll see that there's a whole bunch in here. There's a user RS-232 library as an example. Oh, I don't want to replace it. And then we can create a new, you would create it through a wizard-based function here. And then once you've added it in, then under the sources, under the RS-232, you would be able to access it. Although I don't know why mine's not listing here. That's odd. I'll have to look into that. Huh.
You probably don't have everyone in there that's personal.
Well, that's weird. Huh. I'll have to direct
Yeah.
it. I wonder why it's not listing in there. Okay. What is the difference with the RP4 processor not having the ability to add drivers? Oh, did somebody answer that?
Oh, sorry, it goes away. The difference between the RP4 processor not having the ability to add drivers is that you need a two-way processor to add drivers. The XP series is two-way. The RP is a one-way processor with a built-in 433 antenna. So while you can connect it to the internet and use iPads and iPhones for one-way control, you could also sync it over the internet, but you won't be able to control or get feedback with two-way protocols like Zigbee or IP. So those are the differences. We always recommend using an XP processor because that really meets the demands of today's market. But if you have a very strict one-way type of project, the RP4 is a good solution. Okay.
What else do we have in here? Just about standalone system, no processor if possible. I have a client with ID9, standalone T2I, Samsung 2B. I attempt to do with ID11 Coral, but no list is created. Buttons is not an option. It appears it can be done with ID9. And
Because all those lists require a processor. The Coral has built-in intelligence. You're going to forego that intelligence if you decide to go in standalone. Standalone says, I give up all the processor benefits, one of which are those list menus, which require a processor because of the nature in which they work. You know, those list menus are part of the system manager, which requires a processor to run. So you'll need to use your own template, your own design, your own type of touch. There's really no benefit in a all standalone system, you're gonna
Now,
have to.
that being said, you can do in a system like we've done here, you could add in, say, a Samsung TV as a standalone device and use it as point and shoot type of options if necessary. But
Well,
again,
that's a
not the,
source device though, not a
but that's
project.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm just giving another
Yeah,
ability.
you could even have a remote that only uses IR. But as soon as you give up a processor, you're giving up a lot of the benefits of Coral. You'll probably have to use Obsidian in that case, which I think you wrote there. Yeah, we'll work with Obsidian because Obsidian doesn't have that built-in intelligence and system manager capability that we canned into Coral. So yeah, you give up a processor, you give up a lot. And while you can use one-off devices standalone or remotes, once you tell the project no processor included, it gets real crude real quick. In that case, you're better off using an IR kit and saving your customer the expense of a RTI type of remote or processor or equipment, I should say. Good question though.
What else we got out there, folks? Well, it looks like we've answered most of them. So go ahead and we'll wrap her up then. As I mentioned before, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help in any way we can. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. So be well, everybody. Thanks so much. Have a great day.